mist was alive that night. It crawled across the black soil of Britain like something ancient and remembering, curling low along the roots of trees that had stood since the world was young. The moon was only a thin, bone-colored sliver, barely enough to see by, but enough to cast the land in silver shadow. Wind whispered through the branches like a warning half forgotten, and somewhere beyond the dark tree line, a river murmured as though it carried secrets in its current. This is where our story begins. Not in a castle of shining banners, not in the golden halls of Camelot, not with a king, but with a question every kingdom must answer sooner or later. Who deserves power? For a nation newly broken by war, divided by ambition, clinging to survival, that question was no metaphor. It was a wound that bled across the land. Kings had risen and fallen, oaths were broken. Steel answered every disagreement. The air tasted of smoke and iron. Britain was not yet a kingdom. It was a battlefield wearing the shape of one. And in the heart of this fractured realm, there lay a stone unlike any other, cold, ancient, waiting. It stood in the courtyard of a ruined church, a place untouched even by raiders, because something about it felt watched. A sword was driven into that stone as though the rock itself had swallowed it. The blade shimmered with a faint blue light on nights when the moon was thin, as if remembering stars. Above it, carved in language older than kings, a prophecy. Whosoever pulls this sword from the stone shall be rightful king of Britain. Many had tried. None had succeeded. The stone did not care about strength. It did not care for bloodlines. It did not care for armies waiting behind a man to crown him. The stone waited for someone different, someone the world wasn't looking at, someone no one expected, someone whose story did not begin with a throne, but with loneliness. Because the boy who would one day be king did not yet know his name. He was raised in the care of others, sheltered, overlooked, shaped quietly. While knights argued over banners and lords bartered lives like coins, he lived in the margins of their world, listening, watching, learning how people speak when they think no king is listening. He did not grow up with crowns. He grew up with questions, and questions are the forge of destiny, but destiny never arrives without shadows. Far beyond the fields where the boy slept, far beyond the villages wrapped in smoke from their evening fires, far beyond what human eyes could see, a presence moved in the dark. It did not walk. It did not breathe, but it knew. It had watched kings rise before. It had watched kingdoms fall. It had guided some, destroyed others, and now it watched him, the boy who did not yet know who he was, the boy who did not yet know the weight of fate, the boy who would one day be called Arthur. But before Camelot, before knighthood, before legend carved his name into the bones of history, there was only the world in darkness, a world unsure of tomorrow, a world full of whispering forests, restless spirits, battles waiting in the mud, and the quiet footsteps of destiny drawing near. This is not the legend as told in shining halls. This is not the children's tale of gallant knights and holy quests. This is not a story polished by poets to hide the blood. This is the truth that hides beneath the myth, a truth carved in shadow, steel, and sacrifice. So listen closely. The mist is moving again. Something is waking. Something the world once bowed to, something the world forgot. Something the world will remember again. And it begins with a child sleeping beneath a roof not his own, dreaming of nothing but tomorrow, unaware that history is already whispering his name. They say a king was chosen that day, when a boy's hands closed around the sword that kingdoms could not move. But destiny does not unfold in sunlight alone. There are forces older than crowns, older than kingdoms, older than even the stones that remember forgotten gods. And in the silence that followed the astonishment of the crowd, someone else was watching. Not from among the knights, not from the nobles, not from the priests who feared change more than sin, a figure cloaked in time itself, Merlin. No one knew when he had first come into the world. Some whispered he was born of a mortal woman and a spirit of the forest. Others swore he was older, that he had walked the earth before Rome, before Britain, before even the first stories ever recorded flame on cave walls. But in truth, Merlin belonged to the borderlands, that thin world between what is seen and what is hidden, the world of druidic memory where knowledge was carved into trees, stored in wind, and spoken by rivers. He watched Arthur now, not with pride, not with hope, but with the solemn knowledge of what this meant. A king chosen by destiny is a king chosen for sacrifice. Arthur did not see this, not yet. He saw only disbelief in the eyes of the men around him. He saw the knife-edged tension of power shifting. He saw fear wearing the mask of awe. But Merlin saw the ending, the moment the beginning was written. He stepped forward, staff silent against the stone floor, his voice neither loud nor soft, just impossible to ignore. "He is the one." The hall fell into a hush so deep it seemed the air itself tightened. This was not a suggestion. This was not an opinion. This was a pronouncement from a man who spoke less to the living than to the rhythms of fate itself. Arthur turned to him, half child, half legend, trembling beneath the weight of a destiny he never asked for. "Why me?" he whispered. Merlin's gaze held both kindness and mourning. "Because there was never anyone else." He did not say what followed silently behind those words, and because destiny does not ask if you are willing. They left the hall together, the sword shining like a wound of daylight in Arthur's hand. Outside, the winter wind carried the distant cries of ravens, old prophets of death and memory. Merlin walked beside Arthur, though his steps barely touched the ground. "Do you believe in fate?" Merlin asked. Arthur swallowed, uncertain. "I didn't. Not until today." "Then prepare yourself. Fate is not gentle. It does not choose the joyful path." He paused. "It chooses the necessary one." They walked until the great city gave way to the wilderness, where trees watched like ancient witnesses. Here, where the roots spoke in languages older than men, Merlin breathed differently, as though he had been holding his breath in the world of stone and iron. "Before there were kings," he said, "before there were knights, before even the first sword was ever forged, there was balance." He knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. The ground responded, not moving, not glowing, but listening. The druids were guardians of that balance. We healed. We guided. We listened to the pulse of the world. But as kingdoms rose, as ambition drowned memory, magic retreated. His voice dimmed. Now it flickers like a dying fire. Arthur's gaze rested on the sword, the symbol of strength, of authority, of destiny. "And I am meant to restore it?" he asked. Merlin shook his head. "No, Arthur. You are meant to pay the price for it." The words cut deeper than any blade. A king is not the one who commands the world. He is the one the world demands everything from. From that day, Merlin molded Arthur not into a warrior first, but into a listener. They sat beneath ancient oaks whose roots stretched into forgotten centuries. They walked along rivers that remembered when God still walked among men. They stood atop cliffs where the sea had carved stories into stone long before language. Arthur learned not strategy, not battle, but awareness. "The world speaks constantly," Merlin told him. "Most men never hear it over their own shouting." Arthur listened to wind, to silence, to time, and through this he began to understand leadership not as glory, but as burden. Merlin did not shield him from sorrow. He did not hide the deaths that came with conflict. He did not soften the knowledge that every choice costs something. He simply ensured Arthur knew. For wisdom is not given, it is carried, and it is heavy. Yet there was a question that gnawed at Arthur's heart. Do I choose this path, or is it chosen for me? Merlin's answer was neither comfort nor cruelty, only truth. Destiny is the road. but how you walk it, that is yours alone." This was the line where wisdom blurred into fate, for though Arthur wanted to believe he had freedom, every step he took felt already written in some ancient script etched into the bones of the earth. And Merlin? Merlin felt the weight of knowledge heavier still. He had seen what lay beyond the years of Camelot's splendor. He had seen the fracture, the betrayal, the final battle beneath a sky the color of iron. He had seen the king he now shaped fall. Yet he continued, because destiny is a river. It cannot be dammed, only navigated. And so teacher and king walked the path together, one learning to bear a crown, the other learning to bear the agony of foreknowledge. But the world had begun to stir. Old powers awakened in the shadowed corners of Britain, whispers of sorcery, not of healing, but of ambition, a presence watching from the edge of flame and twilight. Someone else had felt the shift, someone who knew Merlin, someone who remembered him, someone who did not forget. A sister once beloved, now sworn to darkness. Morgana. And her arrival would unravel everything Merlin hoped to preserve. For no destiny unfolds without opposition, and no king rises without a shadow rising with him. The wind carried secrets of coming storms, of old grudges that would not die, of pacts made in silence bound by blood and betrayal. The animals of the forest grew uneasy, the rivers murmured in warning, and even the stones themselves seemed to tense as if anticipating the tremor of power that Arthur now held, yet did not yet understand. Merlin felt it all, the unbroken thread of past and future, and he knew that every step Arthur took would echo beyond his own lifetime. Every choice, every battle, every trust extended would ripple through the bones of Britain, and though he guided the boy, whispered warnings in riddles, and showed glimpses of what could be. The shadow of Morgana West's return, the weight of love twisted into malice, hung over their journey like a storm that had been brewing for centuries. Arthur, still a boy in body though already a king in fate, struggled with the enormity of his role. He wanted clarity, simplicity, the comfort of understanding. Yet each lesson Merlin imparted unraveled the illusion of control. Power, Merlin taught him, was never in the sword alone, nor in the crown, nor in the fear of those who knelt before it. True power was in knowing the world, in listening to it, in feeling its currents and its dangers before they became a storm. And the greatest danger, Merlin knew, would come not from armies, but from hearts he could not yet see, from shadows born of love turned to envy, ambition to hatred. They moved through the land like ghosts and kings intertwined, a boy and a man whose steps were guided by forces neither fully could name. Each night, by the fire, Arthur would stare at the sword, and Merlin would watch him, reading the patterns of his doubt, his courage, and the growing steel within him. Every so often, Merlin would speak of the past, of kings long dead, of magics lost, of choices that had shaped the land long before Arthur was born. And always the lessons circled back to the same truth. No destiny is free, no throne is safe, and no heart remains untouched by the cost of ruling. And far beyond their sight, in the places where sunlight feared to linger, Morgana stirred. The blood of her lineage, the fire of her resentment, the cunning of her mind, all awaited the moment the world tilted in Arthur's favor. To test whether the boy king could withstand the shadow he did not yet understand. Merlin felt her presence as one feels the pull of a tide before it breaks, inevitable, unstoppable, and yet part of the same story written in the bones of the earth. The threads of fate intertwined, knotted with the lives of those who would rise and fall, and the inevitability of choices made long before the dawn of the boy who held a sword in his hand. So the boy walked on, guided by the ancient, tireless watch of Merlin, carrying a crown that had not yet been forged, a kingdom that did not yet exist, and a destiny as dark and relentless as the winter wind. And Merlin, shadow behind the throne, carried knowledge that was a burden heavier than stone, watching, waiting, preparing. For kings may rise and fall, for love may be twisted into ruin, for the world may tremble under the weight of ambition. But fate, inexorable, indifferent, would continue its work, shaping a legend that no man, no magic could escape. And thus the stage was set, the pieces in motion, the first whispers of battle and betrayal threading through the land. Destiny had been claimed in the grip of a boy upon a sword, yet the true struggle, the shadow behind the throne, the sister of darkness, the burden of knowing and guiding, was only beginning. The world Arthur inherited was not a world of peace, but of scars. Britain, still healing from years of war, whispered of kingdoms that had risen and fallen, of lords who bent steel to ambition, and shattered villages in their hunger for power. In the fields, the blood of the forgotten still seeped into the soil, and in the forests, the spirits of those lost to conquest stirred among the trees. The boy who had drawn a sword from stone now bore a crown, heavy with expectation, a weight that could not be lifted by mere courage. And so he dreamed, not of battle, but of a place where such dreams might take root. It began with an idea almost fragile in its infancy, a kingdom unlike any other, a realm forged not from fear nor from the hunger of kings, but from justice, from unity, from the belief that a crown could serve rather than command. Arthur spoke of it in hushed tones first, to those who had shown loyalty, not to ambition, but to the land itself. Knights who had survived wars of succession, lords weary of blood spilled for banners, and common folk who still remembered the taste of peace before steel cut their lives in half. "We will build a city," he said, "a city of hope, not fear, a city where every man who serves the realm is equal in its halls, every voice heard, every oath honored." Merlin, who had guided Arthur since the day of the sword and the stone, watched quietly. The magician's eyes were always old, always knowing, and always tinged with shadow. "A kingdom built on dreams," he murmured, "is a kingdom that must first withstand the weight of reality." But he did not oppose the vision, for he knew that a man could not shape destiny from fear alone. He could only bend the boy's mind, temper his heart, and teach him to see the patterns of the world beneath the smoke of ambition. The first stones were brought to the chosen site by hands calloused from toil, by voices that sang songs older than the forests around them. The land itself seemed to respond, trees bent as though acknowledging the king who walked among them. Rivers whispered their approval, carrying tales of what had been and what might be. Even the winds shifted, weaving through the valley like a blessing or a warning. Here, Arthur imagined, would stand a city of light, and from it, a kingdom of fairness that could endure where others had fallen. Camelot. The name came quietly at first, almost whispered, but it carried the weight of hope. Arthur spoke it before the walls rose, before the banners were sown, before the first stones were set. Camelot. The syllables rolled off his tongue like a promise. It was more than a city. It was a covenant with the people, a living testament to the possibility that power could be wielded with honor, that kings could govern not from fear, but from justice. And the men and women who labored, who poured sweat and stone into the valley, understood that they were not merely building walls, they were shaping legend. Merlin guided them. He knew the art of seeing beyond the present, of discerning patterns invisible to mortal eyes. He walked among architects and masons alike, suggesting angles, positions, foundations, not merely for beauty, but for endurance. "A city is alive," he said. "It breathes, it listens, it remembers. Treat it as you would a child, and it may shelter you when the world turns against you." Every arch, every tower, every carved stone held meaning beyond the eye. The streets would curve to allow light to travel at dawn in a certain way, so that the first day of every year would shine upon the round table central to the city's heart. Even the wells and fountains were placed to capture the flow of the land, so that water, the oldest witness to all human folly and triumph, could speak to those who listened. The Round Table itself was the crown of Arthur's vision. Unlike any throne that had ever existed, it was not a seat of power for one man, but a circle in which all knights were equal. Each chair carved from stone, etched with runes of loyalty, courage, and service, bore no distinction other than the name of its occupant. There would be no head of the table, for none would sit above another. In this design lay both ideal and warning. Greatness was a shared burden, and a kingdom would flourish only if those who served it put honor above ambition. Merlin watched as Arthur traced his fingers along the smooth surface, envisioning the men who would one day swear oaths here, knights whose courage would be tested in ways the boy king could not yet imagine. "The table is more than wood and stone," Merlin said. "It is the heart of Camelot, and the heart must be kept free from shadow." And so the city rose. Towers glimmered against the sky like the teeth of dragons frozen in stone. Gates were carved with symbols of protection and unity, mosaics depicting the histories of Britain's tribes and the lessons of kings long dead. Markets bustled with life before the roofs were complete, for the people of the land recognized something rare, a ruler who did not demand obedience, but inspired it. Roads wound through the city, not straight and utilitarian, but in gentle curves, so that one could see life unfolding in glimpses, children playing, merchants trading, warriors practicing, priests debating. Camelot became more than stone. It became the pulse of a nation's hope. Arthur's court grew with it. Knights arrived not only from his own lands, but from distant corners of Britain, drawn by tales of a king who sought justice rather than conquest. Some came to serve, some to challenge, all to witness the birth of something extraordinary. Lancelot, whose skill with the sword was matched only by the conflict in his heart. Gawain, fierce and loyal. Percival, untested, but burning with faith. Galahad, whose purity would one day shine brighter than any jewel in the king's crown. Each knight carried their own flaws, their own fears, yet all were bound by a single truth. The Round Table demanded courage, not just in combat, but in conscience, and beneath it all, Merlin guided. He whispered lessons in the quiet hours, teaching Arthur that power was meaningless without wisdom, that justice required sacrifice, that even the noblest of intentions could be undone by a single act of pride. The boy king listened, absorbing the patterns of the world, feeling the pulse of the land, understanding that the weight of a crown was never born in comfort. In time, he would learn that every act of mercy, every decision to forgive or punish, would echo through the stones of Camelot as long as they stood. The city, the court, the knights, they were not yet legend. They were living, breathing, imperfect. But already they carried the promise of a golden age. Camelot was more than ambition. It was a vision of a kingdom that could be better, that could endure. Yet Merlin, whose eyes saw the threads of the future, felt the shadows gathering even in the light of progress. For every triumph sowed seeds of envy, for every knight sworn a heart might later betray. The ideal was a fragile thing, but fragile things often shine the brightest, and so he guided, and so he warned, and so he waited. Arthur, walking through the completed streets, could feel it, a hum beneath the stones, a rhythm in the air that whispered of the life the city now held. Citizens spoke to him not as a distant ruler, but as a king whose vision had touched their lives. And for a moment the boy king felt the fragile joy of creation, the rare certainty that he had made something lasting in a world built on chaos. The banners fluttered above, not in conquest, but in celebration of hope. And as the sun fell behind the horizon, casting Camelot in the glow of gold and fire, Arthur understood that this was only the beginning. For every city, no matter how perfect, would face tests. Every knight, no matter how noble, would confront temptation. Every king, no matter how wise, would meet betrayal. But in this moment, in the city carved from vision and toil, there was a promise that even in a world scarred by war, a kingdom could be more than its battles. That even in the shadow of mortality, men and women could build something eternal. And Merlin, standing atop the highest tower, looking out over Camelot as it glimmered in the dying light, whispered into the wind, "So it begins." For Camelot was not just stone and mortar, not just knights and banners. It was a dream made tangible. It was a heart that beat in time with the land itself. It was the first spark of legend. And every legend, Merlin knew, begins with a choice: to build, to believe, and to endure. The streets were quiet now, save for the soft laughter of children, the distant clang of hammers finishing repairs, the low murmur of conversation that carried the weight of hope. Towers rose into the sky like fingers reaching for something beyond human grasp. The round table, central in the great hall, waited patiently for those who would honor its code. Camelot breathed, a living testament to the idea that power could serve, that courage could inspire, that justice could be more than a word. And so the city stood, a jewel in a fractured land, a promise carved in stone and blood and dream. Arthur walked through it, not yet a legend, not yet a king in the eyes of history, but already a ruler in the heart of his people. Camelot had risen, not from conquest, but from vision, and the world, dark and restless beyond its walls, would soon test every stone, every oath, every heart within it. But for now, in the first quiet hours of Camelot's life, there was only light, only promise, only the beginning of a story that would be told for centuries. The round table had been carved from stone and set in the heart of Camelot, a circle without head, a promise that no knight would sit above another, that no man's glory could eclipse the oath he had sworn. Yet a table is nothing without those who honor it. It required hearts, courage, and flaws tempered by loyalty. And so the knights came. They arrived first as rumors, names whispered in the taverns of distant villages, in the halls of weary lords carried by travelers who had glimpsed warriors unlike any others. Lancelot of the Lake, whose skill with the sword was rivaled only by the torment of his conscience. Gawain, whose strength burned bright, yet whose temper could ignite faster than any fire in the hearth. Percival, untested and innocent, burning with faith yet blind to worldly cunning. Galahad, whose purity made him almost untouchable, almost otherworldly, yet marked him as fragile against the cruelty of men. One by one they answered the summons. One by one they swore allegiance, and one by one Camelot took shape around them. Lancelot was first to arrive, drawn by tales of a king who did not merely wield a sword, but a vision. He rode through the gates alone, his horse's hooves striking sparks from stone, and when he dismounted, the men of Camelot felt the air change, as though a storm had entered with him. Merlin, who had watched countless men and kings come and go, studied him silently. There was greatness here, but also the seed of ruin. The way Lancelot's eyes lingered on the ideals of honor and beauty suggested a heart too easily torn between duty and desire, a flaw that could both elevate and destroy him. Gawain came next, his armor dented from battles already fought, his hands scarred from the work of justice as much as violence. He had heard of Camelot not as a rumor, but as a promise, and he carried with him a pride that burned as brightly as the sun. Merlin watched him too, noting the boy king's instinct to welcome such valor, but also the danger of unchecked fire. "Strength is not measured in force," Merlin murmured to Arthur, "but in knowing when to wield it." Arthur nodded, understanding already that the Round Table would be a crucible, not of swords alone, but of character. Percival arrived from the edges of Britain, eyes wide with the innocence of a man unbroken by ambition. He did not know the ways of courts, nor the intrigues of men, yet he bore a faith so fierce that it could ignite courage in those who doubted themselves. In him lay the seed of purity, a reminder to the others that nobility was not merely earned in battle, but in heart. Galahad came after, quiet, unassuming, his steps almost floating above the stone floors. His presence seemed to illuminate the hall as though a candle had been placed in the shadow of greed and ambition. Yet Merlin, whose vision pierced even the layers of men's souls, recognized that perfection alone could not endure cruelty nor shield a man from the failings of those around him. The Round Table became their world. Here, they trained not merely in combat, but in the ideals that bound them. Honor was not a word to be spoken, but a path to be walked. Courage was not simply bravery before the enemy, but the resolve to do what was right when the world tempted you to betray it. Loyalty was not a given, but a daily choice, made in the quiet moments when no one watched. And sacrifice. Sacrifice became the measure of greatness, the proof that the Brotherhood was more than men and armor, that they were, in truth, a family bound by the fires of shared purpose. Yet flaws lingered in every heart. Lancelot's longing for Queen Guinevere would one day test his loyalty, a private war that threatened to fracture the kingdom from within. Gawain's temper would clash with the wisdom of others, teaching that strength without restraint could burn the very ideals he fought to protect. Percival's innocence would be tested against the cruelty of the world, forcing him to confront that purity alone could not protect the weak. Galahad's perfection made him both ideal and fragile, a symbol of what humanity might aspire to but never fully become. And through it all, Arthur watched, learning that a king's greatest task was not merely to command, but to balance the brilliance and the darkness of those he called his knights. The city of Camelot thrived under their vigilance. Its streets echoed with the training of young squires, the clanging of steel, the lessons of courage, the whispered tales of wisdom. And at the center of it all stood the Round Table, where every decision of consequence was weighed, every counsel heard, every debate honored. It was here that loyalty and conflict intertwined, for knights were not saints, and ideals often clashed with human desire. But it was also here that the concept of brotherhood took root, stronger than stone, more enduring than fame. Adventures followed as naturally as sunrise. Lancelot dueled bandits who had grown arrogant in lawless lands, his blade moving with poetry and deadly precision. Gawain defended villages from marauders, his fury a hammer that crushed injustice, but reminded him always of the fine line between courage and rage. Percival embarked on quests of discovery, encountering creatures and challenges that tested the faith and morality of a man untested by cruelty. Galahad, guided by visions that seemed divine, sought purity in deeds, performing acts that inspired awe and devotion. Each knight contributed a thread to the fabric of Camelot, a tapestry woven from bravery, loyalty, flaw, and sacrifice. Yet Merlin always reminded Arthur that greatness was never without cost. "Look at them closely," he would say, gesturing toward the knights practicing in the courtyard. Their courage is real, but so too are their temptations. Their loyalty is a shield, but it can rust. Their honor is light, but even light casts shadows. The Round Table is a mirror of the world, Arthur, and the world will always test your reflection. And Arthur learned to watch, not merely to command, understanding that the life of a king was to guide, to mediate, to hold steady when storms of ambition and desire threatened to topple even the noblest of hearts. Even within Camelot's walls, challenges emerged. Disputes arose over quests, over honor, over perceived slights. Yet the Round Table taught restraint, taught dialogue, taught that courage was as much in the tongue as in the arm. Knights learned to temper pride with humility, skill with wisdom, ambition with loyalty. And slowly, the bond of brotherhood formed, not in shared victories alone, but in shared struggles, in debates that tested convictions, in moments when one knight would sacrifice safety for another. Merlin observed all this quietly, knowing that these trials were necessary. He had seen the course of history and knew that greatness was forged not in ease, but in the crucible of human flaw. Every test the knights endured was a lesson, every failure a warning, every triumph a spark that might someday light the path toward legend. He whispered to Arthur, "These men are not immortal, but they will shape eternity. Guard their hearts as fiercely as you guard the crown, for without their courage, your vision will crumble." And so the Round Table became more than a hall or a circle of stone. It became a symbol, a living testament to ideals that transcended the ambitions of any one man. Courage was honored, loyalty was revered, sacrifice was sanctified, and flaws, though dangerous, were acknowledged as part of the humanity that gave every victory its meaning. Adventures continued beyond the walls of Camelot. The knights rode into forests where shadows whispered ancient magic. They traveled to mountains that scraped the clouds, rivers that carved secrets into stone, and ruins that still held the memory of older kings. Each quest tested their hearts as much as their skill, forcing them to confront the darkest aspects of themselves, to face not just enemies of flesh, but the enemy within. They returned changed, sometimes victorious, sometimes broken, but always bound closer to one another, their bond tempered like steel in the fire of trials. And as Camelot prospered, as the Round Table's circle grew to embody ideals both fragile and eternal, Arthur learned his greatest lesson: that a king is only as strong as the hearts he leads, that greatness is born not in solitary triumph, but in loyalty upheld, in sacrifices made quietly, in courage shared. That brotherhood forged in fire and tested in shadow is the true power behind the throne. The Knights of Camelot were more than warriors. They were custodians of a vision, carriers of ideals, human yet extraordinary, and their flaws as much as their virtues ensured that the legend of Camelot would endure not merely in story, but in the truth of what it meant to be noble, to be courageous, to serve something greater than oneself. Even as shadows began to gather beyond the horizon, even as whispers of jealousy, ambition, and darkness crept into the edges of Camelot, the Round Table remained a beacon, a circle without beginning or end, a brotherhood bound not merely by oath, but by destiny, a living promise that, in a world scarred by war and greed, men could still strive for greatness, not for themselves, but for all. And beneath the highest towers, in the quiet of the night, Arthur would often walk alone, looking upon his knights as they slept or trained, and Merlin beside him, the old magician's eyes filled with both hope and foreknowledge. "Remember this, my king," Merlin would whisper. "They are the sword and shield of your vision. Protect them, guide them, temper them. And one day, when the darkness comes, it will be their courage and their flaws that decide the fate of Camelot." The Round Table was complete. Its knights were assembled. The city of Camelot thrummed with life and purpose, yet its true test lay ahead, in battles that would challenge courage, in hearts that would challenge loyalty, in choices that would challenge the very ideals upon which the kingdom was built. But for now, in this fleeting dawn, greatness rested not on crowns or thrones, but on the men and women who carried it in their hearts. And in that moment, beneath the banners that caught the first light of the sun, Camelot's legend began to breathe. Camelot was still young, its towers gleaming with the promise of a kingdom that dared to be just, its streets alive with the murmur of hope when the sword arrived. Not the sword from the stone, not the one Arthur had drawn to claim his crown, but a blade older than memory, older than kingdoms, older than kings themselves, Excalibur. The name alone carried weight, not merely of steel, but of magic, of destiny, of the blood and sacrifice of generations long forgotten. It was said that the sword came from the Lady of the Lake, a being neither fully human nor entirely divine, who moved between the waters and the world of men like a shadow of inevitability. Her home was a mirror of the world above, forests reflected in still waters, mist curling over lilies, trees standing sentinel on the banks, their roots tangled in secrets. And there, in the cold quiet of the lake, Excalibur rested, its blade shimmering with a light that was neither day nor night, but a promise of power and a warning of responsibility. Merlin had spoken of her long before Arthur ever rode the shores. "The lake does not give lightly," he said. "Its gifts are measured in consequence. To claim them is to claim destiny itself, and a sword that is given, not earned, carries a price heavier than any crown." Arthur, then still a boy king testing the weight of his new realm, had listened in silence, absorbing the rhythms of Merlin's words as if they were spells themselves. And now, standing by the mirrored surface of the lake, the boy faced a moment that would define not just a king, but a legend. The lady emerged from the water with the grace of currents moving around stone. Her eyes were bright with intelligence, sorrow, and judgment. She held the scabbard first, presenting it as one offers truth. "This protects, even as the sword wounds," she whispered, her voice echoing like water over rock. "A king who bears Excalibur must understand that strength is never a gift, but a responsibility. Every swing of this blade ripples through the lives of men. Every battle fought in its name leaves a shadow behind." Arthur reached out, trembling as the sword lifted from the water. Its touch was cold, yet alive, vibrating with power and purpose. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat, as if the blade itself recognized the destiny of the hand that held it. He felt both awe and fear. The sword was beautiful, but it was not a symbol of conquest. It was a mirror. It reflected the soul of the one who wielded it, and if the soul faltered, the blade would demand reckoning. Merlin stood behind him, silent as always, yet his presence was a reminder that the boy was not alone. "The sword is not yours alone," he said. "It is for the realm, for the people, for the ideals you swore to uphold when you drew the first blade from stone. Never forget. Power is nothing without wisdom, courage without justice is vanity, and even kings are bound by the currents of fate." Arthur nodded, understanding in a way that words could never capture. He was no longer a boy who stumbled into legend. He was a king whose choices would shape the lives of thousands, whose failures could shatter a kingdom, and whose courage could illuminate the darkest nights. The scabbard, Merlin had warned, was as vital as the sword itself. While Excalibur could cut through armor and bone, the scabbard held a more subtle magic. It protected the bearer from bleeding, from the mortal vulnerability that could undo kings and commoners alike. It was a reminder that leadership was both sword and shield, action and restraint, might and mercy. Arthur understood this instinctively, sensing the weight of both blade and sheath, of destiny and responsibility, coiled together in his grip. Camelot itself seemed to respond to the arrival of Excalibur. The towers, the streets, even the round table pulsed with renewed energy, as if the kingdom knew that a weapon of this magnitude would shape not only battles, but hearts. Knights trained harder, not merely to test their strength, but to honor the presence of a blade that demanded virtue as much as skill. The city was alive with expectation, but also with quiet apprehension. For magic such as this never arrives without consequence, and the eyes of the world, seen and unseen, were watching. The knights approached one by one, drawn to the lake not merely by curiosity, but by the recognition that destiny had shifted. Lancelot, whose heart already carried a storm of desire and doubt, felt the pull of the sword as a mirror to his own inner conflict. Gawain, proud and fiery, saw in the blade a challenge, a test of his strength and restraint. Percival, innocent yet determined, recognized it as a symbol of faith, of trials that would define not just courage, but the purity of purpose. And Galahad, whose soul already shimmered with near-divine perfection, felt the sword resonate with the ideals he could barely name. Excalibur was not merely a weapon, it was a prism through which each knight saw himself, and in which Arthur would see the kingdom reflected. The first time Arthur drew the sword in Camelot, it was not for battle, but for ceremony. He held it high in the central hall, the sunlight catching the blade and casting a spectrum of color across the faces of those gathered. The knights knelt, citizens gasped, and even Merlin allowed himself a rare smile, though his eyes remained shadowed. "A king is not judged by the sword he holds," Merlin murmured. "He is judged by the choices he makes while holding it." The words echoed through the hall like a prophecy, reminding all that Excalibur's power was not just in cutting steel, but in cutting through fear, doubt, and the temptation of pride. Over time, the sword became both symbol and burden. Arthur wielded it in battle against invading forces, against bandits who sought to exploit weakness, against men whose ambition had no bounds. Each swing was precise, not just in technique, but in judgment, a reflection of the lessons Merlin had instilled, of the ideals that shaped Camelot itself. Yet each victory carried with it the weight of consequence. The blade that defended the innocent could also take lives, and the king who wielded it had to reconcile the necessity of death with the promise of justice. It was during one particularly bitter campaign in the north that Arthur first truly understood the duality of Excalibur. His army was outnumbered, facing men who fought with cruelty and cunning. Yet when he lifted the sword, a strange light seemed to guide the way, cutting through confusion, fear, and despair. The enemy faltered not merely because of his skill, but because they felt the presence of a power that was more than human. Arthur won that battle, but the lives lost weighed heavily upon him. Excalibur had given him victory, yes, but it had also reminded him that power always demanded payment. Merlin's words rang in his ears. Every swing of this blade ripples through the lives of men. And so Arthur came to understand that Excalibur was not merely a tool of war. It was a test, a teacher, a constant reminder that kingship was inseparable from responsibility, and that even the noblest intentions could carry shadows. To wield it wisely was to balance strength with mercy, courage with prudence, authority with restraint. The sword could inspire loyalty, but it could also reveal weakness. It could shape history, but it could never protect a king from the choices he must make. Even in peace, the sword was not idle. It shone in the halls of Camelot, a reminder to knights and citizens alike that their ideals were worth defending. It was displayed during council, laid before the round table, symbolizing that the king's authority was not derived from fear, but from virtue. And Merlin, who had guided Arthur through every step of the journey, remained a shadowed presence, teaching that magic, like power, was a servant of wisdom, never its master. Yet shadows lingered, as they always do, for in the corners of the land whispers of envy and ambition stirred. The Lady of the Lake had given the sword, but not the world's obedience. There were those who would challenge it, who would seek to exploit its existence, who would tempt even the purest hearts to doubt and betrayal. Merlin knew this, and he watched, prepared to guide, to warn, to intervene, though never to act for Arthur. For the boy who had drawn a sword from stone, and now bore Excalibur, had to learn that kingship was not granted by magic alone, but by wisdom, courage, and the choices one made in the face of temptation. And so, Camelot flourished. Under Arthur's hand and the watchful guidance of Merlin, the kingdom grew strong, unified, and just. Excalibur rested at the center of it all, a symbol, a weapon, a reminder that true power was inseparable from responsibility. It shone as a beacon to the people, a promise that even in a fractured world, justice could prevail. And yet, its very brilliance hinted at the trials to come, the betrayals, the loves and losses that would test Camelot in ways neither sword nor scabbard could prevent. for Arthur now understood fully what Merlin had always meant. To wield Excalibur was not to wield invincibility. It was to bear the weight of destiny itself. Each swing, each decision, each act of mercy or judgment was written into the story of Britain. And though the sword could cut down foes and inspire awe, it could not spare him the agony of choice, the sorrow of loss, nor the inevitability of fate. Excalibur had come, but so had the understanding that greatness was never free, that victory was never absolute, that even the king and his sword were bound by the currents of destiny. And Arthur, standing at the center of Camelot, holding the blade that shimmered with light both beautiful and terrible, knew that the sword was not merely a gift. It was a covenant between a king and his people, a king and the world, and a king and himself. Camelot thrived, yet even as the city's towers gleamed and the Round Table's knights upheld their oaths, the human heart remained untamed, a force no sword, no scabbard, no magic could ever fully govern. In the quiet moments between council and battle, when the weight of kingship pressed upon Arthur's shoulders, desire and longing stirred in places unseen, shaping destinies as surely as any blade. It began subtly. Lancelot, the greatest of the knights, whose skill with the sword was rivaled only by the torment in his soul, found himself drawn to the queen. Guinevere, radiant, clever, and more burdened by the crown's demands than most could imagine, carried herself with a grace that belied the sorrow in her eyes. She had grown alongside the kingdom, her own spirit entwined with Camelot's fate, yet no law of court or honor could shield her from loneliness. And Lancelot, though sworn to serve Arthur faithfully, discovered that admiration could transform into something deeper, something dangerous. At first, it was in the briefest of glances, a hand brushing against another in passing, a shared smile that lingered longer than propriety allowed. They spoke of trivialities at first, of the day's council, the progress of Camelot's walls, the matters of court that weighed upon the young king and his knights alike. Yet in those words lay an unspoken understanding, a recognition of solitude, of longing, of burdens that could not be shared even with the closest of companions. Merlin, who watched as always from shadowed corners, saw the signs, but did not intervene. "The heart is a blade as sharp as any sword," he whispered to Arthur once, his eyes distant, focused on the patterns of fate. "It cuts without warning, leaves scars that no healer can mend. Guard it, yes, but understand it. Desire will come, and it will demand choices as hard as any battlefield." Arthur nodded, but he did not yet see the full measure of what was unfolding. The threads of love and loyalty, when entwined, were not easily separated, and Merlin knew that even he could not prevent the coming storm. Lancelot and Guinevere found themselves drawn together in moments when the world seemed paused, when the burden of court lifted, and only the quiet pulse of Camelot remained. In the gardens, hidden from the eyes of curious courtiers, they walked side by side, speaking of hopes, of fears, of the weight of a kingdom that demanded so much from its rulers and its knights. And though neither acted openly, the bond grew, silent but undeniable, a shadow that stretched ever longer as Camelot flourished. The first act of true intimacy came not in words, but in need. Lancelot, weary from patrols along the northern borders, returned to Camelot one night, exhausted and broken by a battle he had barely survived. Guinevere found him alone in the moonlit garden, and for a moment, the boundaries of duty, of oath, of law, dissolved. She tended his wounds, her hands gentle, her voice soft with concern, and in that quiet, a spark ignited. Not lust alone, not desire alone, but the recognition of two hearts carrying burdens too heavy for any one soul. And yet, the danger of such a bond was never far. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word carried the weight of betrayal, for Arthur trusted Lancelot as he trusted none other, and Guinevere's loyalty to her king was absolute, even as her heart betrayed it. Camelot itself seemed to shiver with the tension, as though the city's stones could feel the conflict, as though the round table, carved in equality and honor, recognized that even its most faithful servants could fall prey to the frailty of human desire. Lancelot wrestled with his conscience as fiercely as he had wrestled with enemies in battle. Each night, in the quiet of his chamber, he faced the mirror of his own reflection, seeing both the knight who would die for Camelot and the man who had begun to love the queen in a way that could destroy everything he had sworn to protect. "I serve Camelot," he whispered, voice trembling, "yet my heart serves only her. How can the sword and the heart coexist when one betrays the other?" Merlin's warnings echoed in his mind, a reminder that even the greatest warriors could be undone by the softness of their own humanity. Guinevere, too, bore the weight of her choices. She loved Arthur, not merely as a king, but as the man who had carried her through the birth of Camelot itself. Yet the quiet understanding she shared with Lancelot offered solace from the isolation of the throne, a brief reprieve from the endless scrutiny of court life. She knew the peril, yet she could not ignore the pull of the heart, nor the truth that desire was as inexorable as fate itself. In secret, she and Lancelot exchanged words, glances, and moments of intimacy, each one a silent rebellion against the laws of loyalty, each one a seed of the storm to come. It was in these stolen hours that Camelot's ideals were both upheld and tested. The knights trained, the city prospered, and the Round Table thrived. Yet beneath the perfection lay tension as sharp as any blade. The love between Lancelot and Guinevere, though hidden, began to ripple outward, touching the edges of courtly intrigue. Whispers surfaced, half heard in corridors, hinted at by servants, noted by those whose eyes and ears were trained to detect shifts in loyalty. Camelot, beautiful and shining, was fragile, and the heart's betrayals were as dangerous as any army at the gates. Arthur, unaware of the growing bond, continued to guide his kingdom with the strength and vision that had earned him the loyalty of men and women alike. Yet he, too, would feel the shadow of desire when it came, not immediately, but inevitably, for no kingdom, no matter how perfect, could escape the turbulence of human hearts. Merlin, ever watchful, saw the coming fractures, saw the trials that love and loyalty would demand, yet he remained silent, knowing that fate's lessons must be learned, not merely taught. The tension between honor and passion became a quiet undercurrent in Camelot. Lancelot performed feats of bravery that inspired awe and loyalty. Yet the private torment of his heart cast a shadow over each victory. Guinevere ruled beside Arthur with wisdom and grace, yet her gaze sometimes lingered where it should not, and her decisions, though always measured, bore the subtle imprint of longing. And Merlin, who had guided kings through war, through prophecy, and through magic, understood that this was a different kind of battle, one that would test the foundations of Camelot far more than any army could. The first true confrontation came not with steel, but with a question of conscience. Lancelot found himself alone in the hall, Arthur's presence near but unseen, and he realized that the blade he wielded for Camelot was powerless against the desires that roared in his own heart. Guinevere appeared, their eyes meeting in a silent acknowledgement of both love and peril. The air was heavy, the shadows in the corners deep, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. They could not speak the truth, for to do so would unravel everything Camelot had become. And so they remained, caught between duty and passion, their hearts beating in time with the kingdom that depended upon them. Merlin, observing from a distance, spoke softly to himself. Even the purest intentions can betray. Even the strongest loyalties can falter. The heart is a battlefield all its own, and the cost is paid in more than blood. He knew that this love, though hidden, would shape the future of Camelot, as all great loves and all great betrayals do, for desire is both flame and shadow, capable of warming a kingdom or consuming it entirely. And so life continued, the city thriving, the round table convening, knights performing their duties, battles fought and won, yet beneath it all lay the tension of forbidden love. Lancelot's heart waged war against itself as fiercely as he wielded his sword. Guinevere's soul balanced between duty and longing, knowing that every stolen moment carried a shadow that could one day eclipse the light of Camelot. Camelot, radiant and shining, seemed untouchable. And yet the first cracks had begun to appear, invisible to the untrained eye, but clear to those who understood the fragility of human nature. Desire, once awakened, could not easily be contained, and the greatest lessons of the Round Table were about to be tested in a way that no sword, no magic, no prophecy could fully anticipate. And in that tension, the kingdom held its breath. For Lancelot and Guinevere's love was a spark in the darkness, a fire that could illuminate the beauty of Camelot or consume it entirely. It was a force of nature as ancient and inevitable as fate itself, one that would shape the destiny of kings and knights, of kingdoms and dreams for years to come. And so the legend of Camelot grew not merely in the deeds of its knights, but in the hearts that beat beneath armor and crown, in the choices that were never easy, in the love that dared to flourish even under the shadow of duty. The kingdom shone, brilliant yet fragile, a city of ideals tempered by human hearts, a kingdom that would endure only as long as its people could balance honor and desire, loyalty and passion, courage and the quiet, terrible knowledge that every heart carries its own destiny. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Camelot, as the moon rose over towers and streets, Lancelot and Guinevere met in silence, knowing that, even as they loved, they were bound, not just to each other, but to the kingdom, to the king, and to the fate that awaited them all. Camelot thrived, its banners bright, its round table filled with knights whose courage and honor were spoken of in every hall and village. Yet even as the kingdom shone, shadows moved quietly within its walls. For every light there is a darkness, and the truest threat is often born not of foreign swords, but of those closest to the heart. Morgana, once beloved, once trusted, once a child of Camelot herself. She had grown alongside Arthur, guided by Merlin's hand, her early days filled with laughter, magic, and promise. But the world was rarely kind to those who carried both power and ambition in their veins. She had learned, as all who are wise and perceptive do, that the world favors the bold and punishes the gentle. And in her heart, resentment took root, quiet, insidious, growing alongside her knowledge of magic, of history, of secrets that others never dared glimpse. Merlin had seen it, of course. The signs were subtle at first, glances that lingered too long on power, questions that cut beneath civility, murmurs to shadows that had no right to listen. He warned Arthur gently at first, then with urgency. But the king, occupied with battle's knights and the pursuit of a kingdom that could become legend, could not see what Merlin saw, that Morgana's loyalty had fractured, that the girl who once walked in sunlight now walked in shadow. And then Mordred was born, a child of prophecy, a vessel of fate, carrying within him the seed of Camelot's undoing. Arthur did not see the threat yet. Morgana did not hide her intentions entirely, but she concealed them as one might hide a dagger in a velvet glove. Her magic had grown sharper, darker, more cunning, the lessons of the Druids twisted into shadows of their former purpose. Where Merlin sought to guide, she sought to manipulate. Where Arthur built, she sought to dismantle. Mordred, innocent in infancy, carried the weight of what was to come. Prophecies whispered that his birth would herald betrayal, that the kingdom's greatest knight would rise against its greatest king. Morgana, both mother and architect of this shadow, watched, knowing that destiny could be bent, if only subtly, carefully, deliberately. She whispered to him in the quiet hours of the night, teaching him secrets the world was not ready for, shaping his mind as carefully as a blacksmith shapes steel, forging a weapon in human form. Camelot, radiant and proud, remained unaware. Knights trained, councils convened, and the Grail's echoes still lingered in the hearts of those who had sought it. Yet within the city walls, darkness grew like a vine, twisting silently, slowly, inexorably. Merlin felt it, as he always did, in the tremor of the earth, in the whispers of the wind, in the pulse of the rivers that remembered the old ways. "The shadows are patient," he told Arthur. "They do not strike in haste. They wait, they grow, and they will come when the time is right." Morgana's first moves were subtle. Alliances formed in secret, loyalties tested through whispers and half-truths. Knights whose hearts wavered, who craved glory or feared failure, were drawn into her orbit. She did not need armies at first, only the knowledge of weakness, the careful planting of doubt, the shaping of desire, and fear, until Camelot's own people became unwitting agents of its undoing. Yet her shadow was not merely ambition, it was pain too. She had loved once, perhaps Arthur himself, or perhaps the idea of the kingdom she believed could be hers. That love, denied or betrayed, twisted within her, becoming a weapon sharper than any sword. Where Arthur sought unity, she sought control. Where he built, she dismantled. Where he nurtured, she corrupted. Every spell, every whisper, every act of subtle sabotage carried the weight of personal betrayal as well as political cunning. Merlin, aware but bound by his own codes, did what he could. He counseled, he watched, he warned, but the threads of fate, once set in motion, could not be entirely undone. Arthur's focus remained divided: the kingdom, the knights, the burdens of rule, the fragile hearts of those who loved him. And so the shadow grew, patient, inevitable, shaping the events that would one day bring Camelot to its knees. The kingdom remained unbroken, but cracks were forming in secret. Trust, once absolute among the Round Table, began to falter as Morgana's influence spread, unseen, unfelt, by those who did not perceive the subtleties of magic and ambition entwined. Lancelot, ever vigilant, began to sense currents beneath the surface, murmurs in corridors, fleeting glances that held meaning. Guinevere felt unease as well, though she could not name its source. Even Arthur, despite his wisdom, could not fully see the shadow growing within the kingdom he had built. And so the seeds of rebellion were planted. A child born of prophecy, a sister turned adversary, a kingdom radiant but vulnerable. Camelot's greatest strengths, loyalty, courage, honor, would soon be tested in ways no sword, no magic, no wisdom could fully anticipate. Morgana waited, as shadows do, patient and knowing, until the time was ripe for the fractures she had sown to spread into open betrayal. For no destiny unfolds without opposition, and no king rises without a shadow. Arthur would face the ultimate test, not on the field of battle against foreign foes, but within the walls of the kingdom he loved, where treachery wore the mask of kinship, where magic was no longer a tool of guidance, but a weapon of intent, and where the bond of family could become the most dangerous enemy of all. And Merlin, as always, remained the silent observer, the guide, the prophet, who could see the paths yet to come. He knew the cost of what was approaching. He knew the heartbreak, the loss, the collapse of ideals and dreams. But he also knew that even in darkness, the choices of a few, the courage of Arthur, the loyalty of knights, the strength of love, could still shape the destiny of a kingdom. Morgana's shadow had risen, subtle, inevitable, and within it the promise of war, betrayal, and the unraveling of even the greatest of kingdoms. Camelot's light shone brightly, but it had never been unchallenged. And in the quiet corners, in the moonlit corridors, in the whispers of the wind and rivers, the future waited, dark and patient, for the moment when the seeds of treachery would bloom. And so the legend continued, not just of shining knights and sacred grails, but of betrayal and shadow, of love and ambition, of family turned against itself, and of a kingdom whose greatest threat came not from outside, but from the blood and magic that had built it. The wind over Camelot carried a taste of iron and smoke that no festival or triumph could mask. The city, once radiant with hope, now trembled under the weight of secrets, betrayals, and the inexorable march of destiny. Within its walls, whispers had become murmurs, murmurs had become accusations, and the bonds of trust that held the Round Table together began to splinter. The shadows Morgana had sown now stretched across the city, darkening even the brightest towers. Arthur felt it first as unease, a chill that ran deeper than any winter wind. He had built a kingdom on loyalty and honor, on the courage of knights and the strength of ideals, yet he sensed the cracks forming beneath the surface. Lancelot, the truest and bravest of his companions, walked with a heaviness in his eyes. Guinevere, radiant yet strained, bore the invisible burden of forbidden love and loyalty torn in two. Even the knights who had returned from quests of valor, hardened by battle and tempered by trials, could not escape the growing tension, the invisible threads of betrayal woven through the heart of Camelot itself. Mordred had grown, nurtured by Morgana's dark counsel, his young mind sharp with cunning and his soul steeped in prophecy. He was the instrument of fate, a living embodiment of the kingdom's impending fracture. He watched the city, he watched his father, he watched the king whose name would one day echo through history, and he waited. Morgana had taught him patience, Morgana had taught him subtlety, and Mordred had learned well. The first sparks of rebellion ignited quietly, in whispered alliances and secret pacts, among those knights and nobles who hungered for power or were swayed by fear. Discontent spread like a contagion, the kingdom's very structure shaken from within. The Round Table, once a symbol of equality and brotherhood, began to feel the strain as loyalty was tested, friendships fractured, and courage confronted with treachery. The ideals that Camelot had been built upon now teetered on the edge of ruin. Arthur, ever vigilant, tried to maintain order, yet even the wisest of kings cannot see every shadow, cannot hear every whisper. He convened his knights, he rode across the kingdom, he sought counsel from Merlin, yet the threat was woven into the very fabric of the city. The Grail's lessons, once a reminder of virtue and striving, now seemed distant, a memory of light against encroaching darkness. Every choice carried weight, every command could fracture loyalty further. And then the war began, quiet at first, a series of betrayals that escalated into open conflict. Knights who had sworn oaths to Camelot turned their swords against their brothers. Cities that had celebrated Arthur's justice rebelled, swayed by Mordred's cunning and Morgana's manipulation. The kingdom bled, not from a foreign enemy, but from the fractures within, from ambition, jealousy, and the inexorable pull of prophecy fulfilled. Lancelot, torn between love, honor, and loyalty, found himself confronting impossible choices. He could fight for Camelot, risking his heart and his life, or he could flee from the consequences of his desires. Guinevere, caught between her king and her love, became both a symbol of hope and a point of vulnerability. Every interaction, every glance, every whispered word could tip the balance between survival and annihilation. Mordred's power grew with each passing day, and Morgana's influence spread like a shadow across the battlefield of hearts and minds. She whispered in the ears of the discontented, shaped the ambitions of the reckless, and turned love into a weapon. The kingdom's strengths, loyalty, courage, honor became the very instruments of its undoing when manipulated by cunning hands. The final battle was inevitable. Camelot, once a city of light and ideals, became a field of sorrow and fire. The clash was not only of steel and blood, but of principles, of love and hate, of loyalty betrayed. Knights fell, friends turned against one another, and even the bravest hearts were tested beyond endurance. The city that had promised justice, equality, and glory now trembled under the weight of its own ambition and the inevitability of fate. Arthur, standing on the battlefield, saw the kingdom he had built unravel. Mordred faced him, the son of prophecy, the instrument of shadow. The two men, bound by blood and destiny, clashed beneath skies darkened by smoke and sorrow. The swords rang, the earth shook, and every strike carried the weight of dreams, of ideals, of love and betrayal intertwined. Lancelot fought with courage unmatched, yet even his brilliance could not stem the tide of disloyalty and fate. Guinevere, caught in the chaos, witnessed the destruction of everything she had cherished. The love that had blossomed in quiet corners now became a memory tinged with guilt and sorrow. Merlin, standing apart yet present in every choice and consequence, felt the culmination of centuries of guidance, prophecy, and foreknowledge. Every vision he had seen, every warning he had given, now collided in the heartbreak of Camelot's fall. And then it came, the fatal strike. Arthur faced Mordred, the culmination of betrayal, prophecy, and the weight of destiny. Each struck, each wounded, and both knew that neither could survive untouched. The battle ended not with triumph, but with tragedy, with Camelot's dream shattered and its ideals bleeding into the mud of reality. The Round Table, once a symbol of brotherhood and honor, lay broken, scattered, the knights fallen or scattered in despair. Yet even in death, even in loss, the legend endured. Arthur, though mortally wounded, knew that Camelot's light had not been entirely extinguished. He would be taken to Avalon, a place of healing and mystery, a resting point between life and legend. The kingdom, though fractured, carried the memory of its ideals, the echoes of its triumphs and failures, and the promise that its story was far from over. Morgana and Mordred, triumphant in shadow, understood the cost of their ambition. Camelot was broken, yet in its ruins lay the seeds of hope, of caution, of a lesson written in blood and sorrow. The kingdom would rise again in memory, in myth, in the hearts of those who remembered the bravery, the loyalty, and the love that had defined it. And so the fall of Camelot became both an ending and a beginning, a cautionary tale, a legend, a reminder that even the brightest kingdoms are vulnerable to the shadows within, and that destiny, love, and betrayal are intertwined in ways that no king, knight, or wizard can fully control. The city, silent now but still standing, waited for the stories to be told, for the names of heroes and traitors to be whispered through generations, for the echoes of ideals to survive, even as the flesh of the kingdom lay broken upon the earth. Camelot had fallen, but its legend, forged in shadow, fire, and sorrow, would endure forever. Arthur's body was carried across the silver waters of Avalon, the mists closing gently around him as if the land itself sought to cradle a king too burdened for this world. There was no triumph here, only the quiet dignity of one who had borne the weight of destiny, love, and loss. The kingdom he had dreamed, built, and defended would live on in memory, in story, in the hearts of those who dared to believe in ideals greater than themselves. Camelot would never rise as it once had, yet its legend became immortal. Tales of knights, of love, of betrayal, of the quest for the Grail, and of battles that shook the earth would be told for generations. And in every whisper of wind, in every glimmer of moonlight on a sword, in every shadow cast by a tower, Arthur's name endured, a reminder that even in endings there is hope, and even in death there is legacy. The mists of Avalon rolled back, revealing a world that remembered him. And somewhere in that quiet, a question lingered for every listener, for every dreamer. If you were called to bear a crown, to face destiny, to walk a path not of your choosing, would you have the courage to do so? If you dare to follow legends like Arthur, Lancelot, and Merlin, if you wish to witness the rise and fall of kings and the secrets hidden in the shadows of history, make sure to subscribe. For the story does not end here. Every legend lives again in those who seek it.